Welcome to History Teller YT. Today, we're diving into a story far bigger and older than most people realize. Long before Columbus sailed across the Atlantic, the Americas were already alive with civilizations that built cities, carved monuments, tracked the stars, shaped landscapes, and formed networks stretching across thousands of miles. These weren't isolated tribes or forgotten people. They were innovators, thinkers, architects, traders, artists, and leaders who created entire worlds on their own terms. In this journey, we'll explore the great roots of the Olmec, the rise and influence of the Toltec, and the incredible achievements of the Mississippian mound builders. You'll discover how these societies built monumental structures without metal tools, how their symbols carried deep spiritual meaning, how their trade networks shaped continents, and how their ideas traveled long distances through diplomacy, ceremony, and storytelling. We'll uncover how entire cities rose and fell, how people adapted to changing climates, and how their belief systems created a powerful connection between the natural world and the cosmos. This is the story of the Americas before Columbus, a story of resilience, creativity, movement, and memory. By the time you finish, you won't see this part of history the same way again. So settle in. This is a 2-hour journey through a world full of life, brilliance, and secrets waiting to be rediscovered. Long before anyone in Europe dreamed of crossing the Atlantic, the American continents were already home to a long, layered human story. These lands are not empty, wild, or untouched. They held cultures that developed over thousands of years, each shaped by climate, geography, resources, and a knowledge passed down through generations. When we look far back, we find people moving across continents during the final stages of the Ice Age. Their arrival is still debated, but what is clear is that they spread widely, adapting to forests, plains, mountains, deserts, and coastlines. Over time, they built networks of trade, shared ideas, and developed spiritual systems meant to explain the mysteries of the world around them. Many of these earliest groups left traces in stone tools, bones, hearths, and ancient settlements. These clues tell us that the Americas did not wait for Europe to bring civilization. The people already here created it in their own way, with their own pace and vision. What would later be called the New World was, in truth, an old and thriving world of its own. When we ask who lived in the Americas before Columbus, we often find the popular narrative reduced to only a few well-known civilizations. The reality is much richer. The continents were home to hundreds of societies, each with unique systems of government, agriculture, architecture, and religion. Some built cities with temples and pyramids. Others formed federations and alliances that managed trade routes thousands of miles long. Some engineered complex irrigation fields and agricultural terraces that allowed them to farm harsh landscapes. Others shaped entire environments through controlled burns, forest management, and selective planting. Their cultures were not static. They rose, declined, transformed, merged, or migrated long before any European arrival. Learning about them requires stepping away from the idea that history moves in a straight line. It shifts, evolves, and responds to pressures like climate change, conflict, trade shifts, and disasters. The civilizations of the Americas lived through all of these forces. They were innovators, thinkers, builders, astronomers, and artists. Their knowledge shaped their environments in ways that modern archaeologists are still discovering today. By the time Columbus reached the Caribbean in 1492, the stage of the Americas was already crowded with cultures shaped by thousands of years of innovation. Some were at their peak, while others were fading or transforming into new identities. What Europeans saw was only a snapshot of a much longer story. The Olmec had already risen and fallen. The Toltec influence still echoed through later civilizations. The Mississippian mound builders continued their traditions across vast parts of North America. But each of these societies had deep roots that stretched back centuries before Europeans ever heard rumors of lands beyond the Atlantic. To understand what Columbus found, we have to begin long before him, tracing the spread of ideas, trade, and technology that created a layered civilization across two continents. This history is not simply a prelude to European arrival. It stands on its own. It shows how people built cities, spiritual systems, artistic traditions, and social structures that carried meaning long before Europe's involvement. To uncover who was here before Columbus, we have to follow these threads part by part, civilization by civilization. When we talk about the deep beginnings of civilization in the Americas, the geography of Mesoamerica is one of the most important forces we have to consider. This region stretches from central Mexico down into parts of Central America, and it includes a wide range of environments. There are humid lowlands with heavy rainfall and lush vegetation. There are volcanic islands where fertile soils support strong agricultural systems. There are coasts that open onto major bodies of water. All these landscapes created opportunities and challenges that pushed early peoples to experiment, adapt, and eventually innovate in ways that shaped the course of their history. The first major steps towards settled life came through the cultivation of plants such as maize, squash, beans, and peppers. These were not simply gathered in their wild forms. Over long periods, people selectively bred them, gradually turning them into productive and reliable crops. This process required observation, patience, and a deep understanding of the land. As villages grew, people developed shared rituals, collective labor, and systems of leadership that helped maintain order. In this way, geography did not merely provide a stage. It acted as a guide that influenced how people lived, how they organized themselves, and what they believed. The region became a cradle for the earliest complex societies in the Americas because it offered both rich resources and challenges that demanded creative solutions. These early foundations would later support cultures known for their art, engineering, trade networks, and spiritual traditions. Before the well-known powers of Mesoamerica appeared, smaller communities began forming centers that acted as hubs for trade, ceremony, and innovation. These were not yet full cities, but they were gathering places where different groups exchanged ideas. They experimented with pottery styles, ceremonial objects, tools, and new ways of organizing community life. Over time, some of these centers grew in influence and began shaping the region around them. Archaeological evidence suggests that even before the first great civilization emerged, people already understood how to build large ceremonial platforms, plan ritual spaces, and create symbols that represented shared beliefs. These symbols show up on carved stones, figurines, and objects that traveled great distances, proving that early Mesoamerican societies were not isolated. They built connections across valleys, rivers, and mountains. Through these exchanges, communities developed a shared cultural language that helped them both cooperate and define themselves. This makes it clear that civilization does not begin overnight. It grows slowly through many generations of trial and error, cooperation, conflict, and innovation. These early centers were testing grounds where people learned how to coordinate large building projects, conduct ceremonies involving entire communities, and maintain long-distance communication. All of these skills would later become essential when more complex civilizations emerged. When we look back at these beginnings, we can see that they carried the seeds of what would become some of the most influential cultures in the ancient Americas. By the time the Olmec rose to prominence, The groundwork for complex society in Mesoamerica had already been prepared. The lands they inhabited included fertile floodplains, coastal lowlands, and regions shaped by rivers that provided transportation and sustenance. These landscapes allowed people to gather in larger numbers and produce food beyond their immediate needs. When food is reliable, societies have the freedom to invest time in art, architecture, leadership, and ceremonial life. The Olmec inherited earlier traditions, but also transformed them into something more ambitious. They developed recognizable artistic styles, built ceremonial centers that influenced vast regions, and created symbols that carried deep spiritual meaning. Their influence reached cultures that came long after them, which is why historians often refer to the Olmec as a foundational civilization of Mesoamerica. But they did not appear from nowhere. They emerged because earlier communities had already explored how to live together in larger groups, how to build ritual structures, and how to maintain networks of exchange. What made the Olmec different was the scale and ambition with which they approached these ideas. They took what existed and expanded it into something that reshaped the region. Their rise signals a turning point where village life evolved into organized centers capable of coordinating large populations. This transformation marks the start of a new era in Mesoamerican history, one that will continue to unfold as we move into the stories of the civilizations that followed. The Olmec are often described as one of the earliest major civilizations of the Americas, and their emergence marks a turning point in the cultural history of Mesoamerica. They lived primarily along the Gulf Coast in regions that are now part of southern Mexico, a landscape filled with rivers, wetlands, and dense forests. This environment was both rich and demanding, offering fertile land for agriculture while also requiring communities to manage floods and seasonal shifts. The Olmec rose as leaders who could organize people for large projects, coordinate farming, and shape systems of spiritual authority that unified their communities. They built ceremonial centers that were not just functional spaces, but symbols of collective identity. These centers featured plazas, platforms, and structures aligned with celestial movements, suggesting that astronomy played a role in their rituals. Their society supported specialized roles such as artisans, sculptors, and priests who guided ceremonies. All of this required a degree of organization that went beyond village life. The Olmec also developed early writing-like symbols and a calendar system that influenced later civilizations. Their ability to combine practical leadership with spiritual ideology created a cultural blueprint that echoed across the region long after their cities faded. Their rise is not simply a story of one group becoming powerful. It is a story about how people learned to structure society around shared beliefs, organized labor, and a sense of collective purpose that extended across generations. The Olmec are best known for their monumental stone heads, which stand as some of the most iconic works of ancient American art. These massive sculptures, carved from basalt, transported over long distances, represent leaders whose authority was both political and spiritual. Creating and moving these stones required planning, tools, labor, and a shared belief that such efforts were worthwhile. But the stone heads are only part of their artistic tradition. The Olmec produced intricate jade carvings, masks, figurines, and symbolic motifs that reflect their worldview. Many of these artworks feature themes of transformation, such as humans merging with animals. The jaguar, in particular, appears frequently and is believed to have held powerful supernatural meaning. Their imagery suggests a belief system that blended the natural and spiritual worlds. The Olmec also influenced language, trade patterns, and ceremonial practices across distant parts of Mesoamerica. Their motifs appear in regions where they did not build cities, indicating that their ideas traveled far. This happened not through conquest, but through exchange networks where goods, stories, and symbols passed from group to group. Their artistic style became a shared cultural reference that later civilizations, such as the Maya and others, adapted in new ways. The Olmec did not simply leave objects behind. They left a legacy of ideas about leadership, ritual, art, and cosmology that shaped the identity of Mesoamerica for centuries. The decline of the Olmec is a subject of ongoing research and debate, yet it is clear that their disappearance was gradual, not sudden. Environmental changes may have contributed to the shift. The regions they occupied were vulnerable to river course changes, droughts, and flooding that could disrupt agriculture. Social and political pressures may have also played a role. As their ceremonial centers grew, they may have faced internal conflicts or competition from rising regional powers. Trade routes shifted and influence moved with them. Instead of collapsing overnight, Olmec centers slowly lost prominence, and populations dispersed or merged with neighboring cultures. Even as their cities faded, their cultural impact continued. Later civilizations adopted elements of Olmec symbolism, ceremonial architecture, and forms of governance. Ideas that emerged during their height did not vanish. They transformed and reappeared in new forms across Mesoamerica. Understanding the Olmec decline helps us see that ancient civilizations rarely vanish entirely. Their knowledge survives through the people who continue to carry their stories, practices, and technologies. The Olmec laid foundations that others built upon, showing how early innovation becomes part of a wider cultural memory long after the original society has changed. To understand the Olmec not just as a civilization, but as a living society, we have to imagine the texture of daily life inside their settlements. These were not simple villages. They were organized communities with plazas, residential zones, ceremonial spaces, and areas for specialized labor. People woke to the sounds of wildlife from surrounding wetlands and forests, but the rhythm of their days was shaped by agriculture, craftwork, and religious obligations. Most families lived in modest homes built from wood, clay, and thatch, arranged in clusters that reflected kinship or occupation. Farming remained central to survival, with maize, beans, and squash forming the backbone of the diet. These crops were supported by fishing, hunting, and gathering, especially in wetland regions where rivers and lagoons were rich with resources. Food production was not simply practical. It was tied to seasonal rituals meant to honor the forces believed to guide growth and fertility. Within the city, artisans produced stone tools, pottery, and ceremonial objects. Traders carried goods such as jade, obsidian, and shells from faraway places. Religious authorities played a major role in maintaining order, conducting ceremonies, interpreting signs from nature, and advising rulers on matters believed to carry spiritual consequences. Life in an Olmec center blended work, belief, and community into a single experience where every task had a connection to the wider social and spiritual world. Olmec society did not function without a clear hierarchy. Leadership combined political power with spiritual responsibility. Rulers were seen as mediators between human life and the unseen forces believed to govern the world. This gave them authority not only over decision-making, but also over ceremonies, alliances, and major construction projects. Their status was reinforced through rituals held in plazas where the community gathered to witness events that linked leadership to divine influence. Surrounding the leaders were elites who served as administrators, priests, warriors, and advisors. These individuals helped coordinate long-distance trade, diplomatic relationships, public works, and religious observances. Their roles required literacy in symbolic systems, knowledge of astronomy, and training in ceremonial practice. Below the elite classes were the majority of the population who worked in agriculture, construction, fishing, crafting, and day-to-day labor. Although this structure created inequalities, it also supported the functioning of complex society. People contributed to large projects because communal identity was tied to the success of the center itself. Ceremonial architecture and stone monuments were not just expressions of power. They were reminders that the community existed within a larger cosmic order. The social structure ensured stability, but also allowed innovation because leadership had the means to organize large groups of people. This hierarchy became a model that later civilizations in the region adapted to their own needs, showing how influential the Olmec approach to governance truly was. One of the clearest signs of Olmec sophistication is the scale of their construction. Building ceremonial platforms, plazas, mounds, and large sculptures required more than vision. It required planning, engineering knowledge, resource management, and a workforce willing to invest enormous effort. Moving basalt stones for the colossal heads is a powerful example. These stones had to be transported from distant volcanic regions by river and land, an undertaking that demanded organization and cooperation across many stages. The work was dangerous and physically demanding, yet communities participated because these monuments were more than decorations. They represented identity, continuity, and spiritual protection. Construction was often timed with agricultural cycles or ceremonial events so that the entire community could take part. Ritual offerings, feasts, and gatherings strengthened bonds among families and reinforced the idea that monumental work connected people to their ancestors and to forces beyond the physical world. Architecture also served practical purposes. Plazas allowed large gatherings for ceremonies, while raised platforms provided protection from flooding. Horizons and building layouts were aligned with celestial movements, linking everyday life to the environment and skies. Through these monumental projects, the Olmec demonstrated their ability to transform the landscape into a symbolic and functional space. Their achievements set the stage for the architectural traditions of later Mesoamerican societies, who inherited the belief that building was both an act of engineering and an act of devotion. The Olmec were not isolated builders living behind dense forests and wetlands. They were part of an expanding network of exchange that stretched far beyond their homeland. Archaeologists have found materials in Olmec centers that could only have come from distant regions. This includes obsidian from highland volcanic zones, jade from the Motagua Valley, iron ore from faraway deposits, and shells brought from coastal areas that lay outside their immediate territory. These materials did not arrive by accident. They moved along established routes shaped by geography, alliances, and the shared interests of different communities. Trade was more than an economic activity. It served as a way to spread ideas, symbols, and cultural practices. When jade beads or carved figurines traveled hundreds of miles, they carried artistic styles that influenced others. In return, Olmec centers gained access to resources that strengthened their economic and spiritual authority. People who controlled trade routes often held considerable power because they managed the flow of goods and the relationships that came with them. These exchanges created bonds between regions, encouraging cooperation but also competition. Communities developed reputations for certain crafts or ritual items, and the Olmec became well known for their skill with stone carving and symbolic motifs. Through these networks, their culture reached places they never conquered. Influence spread gradually, one object and one story at a time, shaping the early cultural landscape of Mesoamerica. As goods traveled across long-distance routes, so did symbols and beliefs. When archaeologists find Olmec-style motifs far outside the Gulf Coast, it suggests that other societies saw value in adapting, or integrating these ideas into their own traditions. This does not mean they became Olmec themselves. Instead, cultural interaction created a shared visual language that linked communities. Symbols such as jaguar-human hybrids, flame eyebrows, infant-faced figures, and stylized creatures appear in different regions, often interpreted through local traditions. Some communities use these motifs to express their own spiritual concepts, blending new influences with familiar ideas. This process shows that ancient societies learned from each other in dynamic ways. It challenges the idea that civilization develops in strict isolation. The Olmec contributed strongly to this shared cultural vocabulary, but they were also shaped by the people they interacted with. Exchange worked both ways. Ritual practices, astronomical observations, and agricultural methods traveled through these networks. The spread of iconography likely reflects deeper interactions at political, ceremonial, and social levels. Leaders may have exchanged gifts to establish alliances. Skilled artisans may have traveled to new regions, earning support through their craft. Pilgrims or merchants could carry stories that linked distant communities into a wider cultural sphere. This interaction gave rise to traditions that continued long after the Olmec cities faded, forming the backbone of later developments in Mesoamerican history. Unlike later Mesoamerican civilizations, the Olmec did not form an empire with armies, imposed rule, or widespread territorial control. Their influence spread through prestige, artistry, and the attraction of their ceremonial centers. People traveled to these centers for festivals, rituals, trade gatherings, or political discussions. These visits helped establish bonds of respect and shared identity. Olmec centers became places where ideas circulated freely, drawing in leaders from other regions who wanted to observe successful methods of governance or ceremonial practice. The Olmec established themselves as spiritual and cultural authorities rather than conquerors. Their elites gained influence by demonstrating wisdom, technical skill, and ritual knowledge. This allowed them to shape regional practices without direct control. Over time, their model of leadership became admired across wide distances. Communities began to adopt aspects of their architecture and ceremonial layouts, such as plazas arranged for public gatherings, mounds that elevated important structures, and orientations aligned with celestial movements. These adaptations show that influence can extend far without military force. The Olmec shaped early Mesoamerica through example and innovation, leaving behind ideas that would continue developing long after their own centers declined. Their legacy reminds us that cultural power often spreads through inspiration rather than domination. It grows when people see value in the practices of others and choose to bring those ideas into their own lives. Understanding the Olmec requires understanding how they viewed the universe. Their world was not divided into separate categories of natural and supernatural. Instead, everything around them carried life, intention, and power. Mountains, rivers, storms, animals, ancestors, and celestial bodies all played roles in shaping existence. The Olmec believed that unseen forces flowed through the world and could influence everything from rainfall to harvests. Their leaders were responsible for maintaining balance between these forces, which required rituals, offerings, and ceremonial practices performed at precise moments. Many of their ceremonial centers were aligned with the movement of the sun or the cycles of the stars, revealing how closely their daily life depended on observing the heavens. The spiritual world was imagined as being layered. There was the surface world of humans, the watery or cavernous realm beneath, and the sky realm above. These layers were connected by symbolic points where communication between worlds became possible. Caves, springs, and mountains were considered portals where human beings could seek guidance or power. Their rituals often took place in these locations to honor the forces that move between realms. The belief in transformation played a central role in their spiritual life. Humans could take on qualities of animals, and certain animals were believed to guide or protect individuals. This worldview shaped their art, their rituals, and their political systems. It created a society where spirituality influenced every decision, from farming cycles to monumental construction. Olmec ceremonial spaces were not built randomly. They were designed to represent the cosmic order and to create environments where rituals could connect communities with spiritual forces. Plazas served as gathering places for large ceremonies, while platforms allowed priests or leaders to perform rituals elevated above the crowd. Some spaces were aligned with celestial events, such as solstices, indicating the role of astronomy in their ceremonies. Rituals often involved offerings of jade, clay figurines, carved stone objects, and food items. These offerings represented gifts to the forces that govern life. They were placed in carefully dug pits, under platforms, or at symbolic points within ceremonial centers. Water played a significant role in rituals because it was associated with fertility, life, and transformation. Many offerings were placed near springs or in locations where water accumulated during heavy rains. Fire rituals were also common, symbolizing renewal, purification, and the connection between earthly and celestial realms. Drums, flutes, and shell instruments provided sound for ceremonies, guiding participants into spiritual states. Priests may have used costumes or masks depicting animals or supernatural beings to represent the merging of human and spiritual worlds. Caves, in particular, were treated as sacred, acting as passages to the realm beneath the earth. Rituals inside them often included torchlight, chanting, and the placement of symbolic objects. Through these practices, the Olmec created rituals that shaped identity and strengthened the bonds that held their society together. One of the most distinctive themes in Olmec spirituality is the merging of human and animal identities. This concept appears throughout their art and reflects a belief that animals possessed powerful qualities humans could connect with. The jaguar is the most iconic example. It was associated with strength, night, rain, and the ability to navigate the dark or hidden realms of existence. Many Olmec sculptures show figures with jaguar-like features, suggesting that leaders or shamans believe they could draw power from this animal or transform into it during spiritual experiences. This blending of identities was not fantasy. It represented a deeper idea that humans could channel forces of nature through ritual and discipline. The infant-faced figure seen in Olmec art may represent mythic beings connected to fertility, rain, or agricultural cycles. Other animals such as birds, snakes, and amphibians appear frequently in carvings, each symbolizing different forces. Birds linked the sky realm with earthly life. Snakes represented transformation and the movement between worlds. Amphibians symbolized renewal because they lived both in water and on land. These beliefs shaped rituals, social roles, and even leadership. Rulers demonstrated authority through symbolic association with powerful animals. Their ability to communicate with or embody these forces reinforced their legitimacy. This worldview helped the Olmec explain natural events, strengthen community bonds, and maintain stability. It also influenced later civilizations, who inherited and expanded these symbolic traditions. The merging of human and animal qualities became one of the defining features of Mesoamerican cultural identity. When the Olmec ceremonial centers began to fade, the cultural map of Mesoamerica did not collapse. Instead, it reorganized. Other regions that had long interacted with Olmec networks stepped forward to develop their own identities. As populations moved, adapted, and formed new alliances, fresh centers emerge across valleys, mountains, and coastal plains. These shifts were not sudden. They unfolded slowly across generations as the influence of older centers weakened and new leaders appeared with different priorities. The decline of the Olmec allowed smaller communities to innovate on their own terms. They built ceremonial platforms with local styles, experimented with new pottery, and shaped spiritual systems that mixed older traditions with new interpretations. Climate also played a role in shaping these transformations. Changes to river patterns, rainfall, or fertile plains could push communities to relocate or modify their agricultural practices. Trade routes that once brought prestige items into Olmec centers began to redirect toward rising regions that offered stability or resources. With time, these emerging centers grew more confident in their cultural expressions. The architectural layouts, artistic designs, and ritual practices of the new era reflected both inheritance and departure. They showed respect for earlier foundations, but also a desire to represent unique ideas. The transition after the Olmec demonstrates that ancient societies were not dependent on a single cultural leader. They could adapt and continue developing even when the previous cultural giant had faded from dominance. In this period of shifting influence, the seeds of new civilizations took root, setting the stage for another wave of innovation across Mesoamerica. As the Olmec centers grew quiet, several regions began expanding their influence. The Valley of Oaxaca, for example, saw the rise of early communities that would later form powerful urban centers. Farther east, groups in what is now Chiapas experimented with monumental architecture and developed distinctive ceremonial patterns. On the Gulf Coast and inland river valleys, new communities built smaller but meaningful ritual spaces that reflected their own spiritual systems. The spread of agriculture and improved knowledge of land management allowed populations to grow. This population growth brought new pressures. Communities needed to organize resources, manage disputes, and protect trade networks. This led to the development of leadership roles that were more complex than those found in smaller villages. Artistic styles flourished during this time, revealing how different groups interpreted shared themes. Some favored geometric patterns, others created detailed human figures, while some explored stylized representations of animals and deities. These artistic choices reflect broader cultural experimentation. The world after the Olmec was not one of uniformity. Instead, it was marked by diversity, variety, and constant adaptation. Musical instruments evolved, pottery took on new shapes, and ritual architectures adopted arrangements that reflected local priorities. Long-distance trade persisted, but its patterns changed. Goods such as obsidian, jade, and shells now circulated through different hubs. These shifts reveal that the post-Olmec period was vibrant and creative. It set the groundwork for later civilizations by encouraging regions to strengthen their own cultural identities. Although Olmec centers declined, their ideas did not disappear. They continued to echo across regions in subtle ways. Later societies inherited the concept of aligned ceremonial platforms, astronomical observation, and the blending of spiritual imagery with political authority. These elements did not remain unchanged. Each community reinterpreted them to fit its own worldview. Ritual calendars evolved differently in various regions, but the idea of timing ceremonies with celestial cycles persisted. Symbolic motifs adapted as well. The jaguar theme, for instance, continued to appear in many cultures, though its meaning shifted with local beliefs. Architecture also showed continuity. Raised mounds, plazas, and alignments with horizon points became common features in emerging centers. These choices demonstrate how cultural memory survives even when direct political links fade. Communities preserve certain concepts because they found them meaningful, effective, or spiritually valid. As centuries passed, these foundational ideas helped guide the rise of complex societies such as the Maya and others who built upon inherited knowledge. The period following the Olmec reminds us that civilizations grow from layers of earlier influence. Innovation does not erase the past. It expands from it. This continuity created a cultural bridge between the earliest Mesoamerican developments and the later complex societies that would shape the next chapters of history across the region. Understanding this bridge prepares us to explore the civilizations that emerged in the Olmec's wake and carried forward the legacy of early Mesoamerican ingenuity. Centuries after the decline of the Olmec, Mesoamerica entered a new phase defined by migration, conflict, and the merging of cultural traditions. Out of this shifting world emerged the Toltec, a society that would later earn a reputation as warriors, builders, teachers, and innovators. Before they became a recognized civilization, the region that would one day host their capital was home to earlier groups who experimented with settlement patterns, agriculture, and ritual structures. The rise of the Toltec happened gradually. It reflected not just the ambitions of a single group, but the conditions of a region recovering from earlier upheavals. When major centers collapsed or weakened, people moved into new territories. These migrations brought together different languages, beliefs, and skills. Over time, these varied groups blended into a more unified cultural identity. The land in central Mexico provided fertile soils and access to trade routes that connected distant regions. These advantages helped communities grow and cooperate. Leadership began to take shape through individuals who could organize defense, coordinate irrigation, and manage ceremonial life. Slowly, this leadership expanded into a more structured political system. Early Toltec groups learned from older traditions, including architecture, trade, and artistic expression, but they adapted these ideas to their own environment. Their rise shows that civilizations often form through the meeting of diverse peoples who share common goals. The Toltec world grew not because of a single moment of transformation, but through a series of choices that shaped a community into a future regional power. The city of Tula, known for its strategic placement and strong defenses, would become the center of Toltec civilization. Its location provided access to fertile lands, natural resources, and trade routes that linked it to surrounding valleys and distant regions. Before it developed into the large city historians recognize today, Tula likely began as a settlement where farmers, artisans, and traders lived close enough to exchange goods and labor. Over generations, as leadership strengthened, construction projects expanded. Plazas, step platforms, ball courts, and ceremonial spaces were built with careful planning. Architecture reflected an emphasis on symmetry, order, and meaning. These spaces allowed the Toltec to host rituals, festivals, political gatherings, and public events. Housing zones grew around the ceremonial center, revealing a structured society with elites, artisans, laborers, and merchants. Art played a central role in defining Toltec identity. Stone carvings, reliefs, and pottery designs show themes of warriors, animals, mythic beings, and scenes that reflected both historical and spiritual elements. Tula became a place where ideas circulated freely. Artisans developed styles that blended influences from earlier civilizations with new interpretations. Priests refined ceremonial practices that aligned with astronomical cycles and sacred narratives. Traders traveled widely, carrying Toltec goods and symbols to other regions. These connections enhanced Tula's prestige. Its reputation spread, attracting visitors, allies, and possibly people who sought education in its artistic and ritual traditions. Tula was more than a city. It was a cultural center whose influence shaped later civilizations. As the Toltec gained recognition, they developed a cultural identity that combined history, myth, and social values. Stories of great leaders, including figures who later became legendary, circulated widely. These stories helped unify society by presenting ideals such as courage, discipline, and spiritual awareness. Over time, the Toltec crafted narratives that explained their origins and justified their authority. These myths were not literal histories. They were symbolic teachings that guided behavior and reinforced cultural norms. Warriors played an important role in Toltec identity, not only as defenders, but as figures tied to cosmic order. Their actions were believed to influence the balance between earthly life and spiritual forces. This connection gave warfare a ceremonial dimension. Victory was not only strategic, but symbolic, representing the triumph of order over chaos. Artistic traditions express these beliefs. Images of warriors with symbolic weapons, helmets, and attire carved onto columns and walls reveal a worldview that linked human struggle with cosmic significance. The Toltec also valued knowledge, craftsmanship, and discipline. The concept of becoming a refined person, skilled in thought and action, was central to their philosophy. Later civilizations admired the Toltec for this reason. The Toltec identity blended practical achievements with deeper meaning, shaping how they understood their place in the world. Their influence would ripple across Mesoamerica, inspiring future societies to adopt aspects of their stories, designs, and values. By examining how Toltec identity formed, we see how civilizations use myth and memory to strengthen unity and project power. When Tula reached its height, it became a bustling urban environment filled with activity from dawn to dusk. The rhythm of life was shaped by work routines, religious obligations, craft production, and the movement of goods across neighborhoods. Most families lived in residential compounds built with stone foundations, adobe walls, and roofs supported by timber. These homes often included courtyards where cooking, weaving, and small-scale craft activities took place. Farming remained the foundation of survival. Although many residents lived inside the city, surrounding fields provided maize, beans, squash, and other staples. Irrigation canals and terraced plots allowed farmers to manage water and improve yields. Markets played a major role in connecting people across social classes. Traders sold pottery, tools, textiles, obsidian blades, and food items. These markets created a sense of interdependence among residents. People from distant communities also visited Tula, bringing goods such as salt, cacao, shells, and precious stones. The city's organization revealed a society that valued coordination and structure. Streets and plazas created natural gathering points. Workshops were grouped by craft specialization. This allowed artisans to concentrate their labor and pass skills through generations. Children learned traditions from elders through daily participation. Religion permeated daily life. People offered food or incense at small household altars. Workers honored deities associated with their trade, believing that spiritual harmony contributed to success. Music, dance, and storytelling strengthened bonds within neighborhoods. These practices allowed the Toltec to maintain identity in a complex and growing society. Daily life in Tula was not quiet or uniform. It was dynamic, layered, and full of the interactions that sustain a thriving urban center. Toltec society depended on a structured hierarchy that allowed the city to function efficiently. At the top were rulers who combined political leadership with ceremonial responsibility. Their authority was not based solely on force. It relied on a belief that they acted in harmony with cosmic powers. This connection allowed them to guide the community through rituals, seasonal observances, and decisions that influenced trade and defense. Surrounding the ruler was a group of elite administrators, priests, and high-ranking warriors. These individuals carried out specialized roles. Priests interpreted celestial events, maintained ritual calendars, and conducted ceremonies at major temples. They advised leaders on decisions believed to affect cosmic balance. Warriors held prestige because they protected the city and symbolized discipline. Their status was reinforced through ceremonies that highlighted their bravery, loyalty, and symbolic connection to mythic traditions. Skilled artisans also held important positions. Those who produced high-quality stone carvings, ceremonial objects, or luxury items gained respect because their work represented the identity and values of the city. Merchants formed another respected group. They traveled widely, brought news from distant regions, and maintained alliances that strengthened Tula's economic position. At the broader level, farmers, laborers, and workers made up the majority of the population. Their labor supported the city's growth, construction, and food supply. While the hierarchy created clear distinctions in power, it also created stability because each group understood its responsibilities. Toltec leadership relied on cooperation, shared belief, and the idea that the entire city existed within a unified spiritual and social order. Toltec art and architecture reveal a society that valued precision, symmetry, and symbolic meaning. The city of Tula was built with a layout that reflected both practical needs and cosmic principles. Plazas formed open spaces where people gathered for ceremonies and public events. Step platforms and pyramids rose above these plazas, symbolizing connections between the earthly world and higher realms. One of the most famous features of Toltec architecture is the set of monumental warrior columns known as the Atlantean figures. These carved stone columns depict armed figures standing with rigid posture, wearing elaborate headdresses and carrying symbolic weapons. They supported the roof of a palace structure, merging architectural function with spiritual representation. Their presence reinforced the Toltec association between warfare, cosmic order, and leadership. Stone reliefs found throughout Tula depict jaguars, eagles, serpents, and human figures intertwined with symbolic elements. These designs communicated stories, values, and lessons. They also conveyed the idea that human society must remain balanced with natural and spiritual forces. The precision of Toltec craftsmanship can be seen in pottery as well. Pottery styles range from simple household vessels to highly decorated pieces used in rituals. Artisans used painted designs, carved patterns, and carefully shaped forms to reflect cultural identity. Architecture served practical roles such as protection, shade, and communal gathering, but it also reminded residents of their place within a structured universe. Every building, sculpture, and design element contributed to the sense that Tula was not just a city. It was a living expression of Toltec worldview, where art and architecture worked together to reinforce shared beliefs and social unity. Toltec influence expanded far beyond the walls of Tula, but not in the way empires with large armies typically spread. Their reach developed through prestige, economic networks, and the appeal of their ceremonial practices. Traders traveled widely, carrying goods such as obsidian blades, textiles, carved stone items, and symbolic objects that reflected Toltec worldview. As they moved through valleys and along established trade routes, they connected with communities that valued the craftsmanship and ideas of Tula. These encounters helped spread architectural styles, religious symbols, and artistic motifs. Communities in distant regions sometimes adopted Toltec-inspired designs in their own temples or ritual settings, showing respect for the culture associated with Tula. This exchange did not mean that these communities became political subjects of the Toltec. Rather, they integrated ideas that resonated with their own traditions. Warriors also played a role in extending Toltec influence. Their discipline, organization, and symbolic importance inspired admiration among neighboring groups. Some regions developed alliances that strengthened their ties to Tula, while others may have offered tribute or formed mutual defense agreements. The spread of Toltec influence created a wide cultural sphere in which certain symbols, stories, and styles achieved shared recognition. This sphere formed a bridge between earlier Mesoamerican traditions and the societies that came later, particularly the powerful states that would rise in central Mexico. The success of Toltec expansion demonstrates how cultural authority, more than military conquest, can shape a region. Their ideas circulated because people saw value in them, not because they were forced into adoption. Despite their impressive achievements, the Toltec faced challenges that slowly eroded their stability. Large cities require constant resources, cooperation, and reliable leadership. When any of these weaken, tension grows. Environmental factors may have played a major role in changing the fortunes of Tula. Shifts in rainfall patterns, soil exhaustion, or reduced access to vital resources could have strained food supplies. If crops failed or water became scarce, people would feel frustration and doubt. Such conditions often create social unrest as communities question the ability of leaders to maintain cosmic balance. Internal divisions may have developed among elites. Different factions could have disagreed over ceremonial practices, succession, or relationships with neighboring regions. Rival claims to leadership weaken unity and can lead to conflict within the ruling class. These tensions echo through the archaeological record in signs of disrupted construction projects, abandoned structures, or sudden changes in settlement patterns. Another factor may have been the rise of competing centers. As other regions grew stronger, trade routes could shift, reducing Tula's economic power. Merchants who once traveled through Toltec domains might have redirected their journeys toward emerging cities in the highlands or farther east. This would weaken Tula's ability to maintain influence across long distances. Pressures from outside enemies also cannot be dismissed. Conflicts between cities were common, and Tula's reputation may have made a target. Over time, these combined pressures created vulnerability. The Toltec world, once stable and admired, began to fragment as conditions changed and confidence dwindled. The decline of Tula was not a single event. It unfolded across many years as internal instability and external pressures made it difficult for the city to remain unified. Eventually, major areas of Tula were burned, abandoned, or left in disrepair. Populations dispersed into surrounding regions or migrated in search of safer or more prosperous lands. Even as the city declined, its memory grew. Later civilizations viewed the Toltec not simply as a historical society, but as a symbol of cultural excellence. Stories about them became part of regional mythology. The idea of Toltec wisdom, Toltec artistry, and Toltec discipline became a model that future generations admired. The decline of their physical city did not diminish their symbolic power. In many later traditions, the Toltec were portrayed as master builders and refined thinkers whose teachings influenced far-reaching cultural developments. This legendary reputation shows how memory can shape the legacy of a civilization more strongly than any physical structure. Although the real Toltec world ended, the idea of the Toltec persisted. Their architectural styles, artistic motifs, and symbolic imagery remain part of the cultural vocabulary. Societies that rose after Tula incorporated elements of Toltec identity to legitimize their own authority or connect themselves to a perceived golden age. In this way, the Toltec became more than a historical civilization. They became an enduring reference for achievement, creativity, and philosophical depth. Their decline marks the end of one chapter, but their legacy continued shaping Mesoamerica long after Tula fell silent. While civilizations flourished in Mesoamerica, a very different but equally impressive cultural world grew in North America. This world, known as the Mississippian culture, developed across vast regions shaped by rivers, forests, and fertile plains. The Mississippi River and its many tributaries formed a natural network that connected distant communities. These waterways were highways for travel, trade, communication, and cultural exchange. The landscape encouraged settlement not only because it offered fertile soil, but because it allowed people to adapt to a variety of environments. Floodplain areas provided rich agricultural land for crops, such as maize, beans, and squash. Higher ground offered safe locations for villages and ceremonial centers. The Mississippian world did not appear suddenly. It developed through centuries of experimentation with farming, community leadership, ritual expression, and long-distance exchange. Early groups learned how to manage the land through controlled burns, selective planting, and seasonal strategies that improved productivity. As food production increased, populations grew, and communities began forming larger, more complex settlements. These settlements featured central plazas, wooden structures, storage facilities, and defensive palisades. Across these communities, a shared cultural pattern emerged. People built earthen mounds for ceremonies, political events, and burials. These mounds became defining features of Mississippian society. The landscape itself reflected a worldview that combined practical needs with symbolic meaning. Each mound, each plaza, and each settlement pattern revealed how people understood their relationship with nature, community, and the unseen forces guiding the world. The foundation of Mississippian culture rests on this deep connection between people and their environment. Among all Mississippian sites, Cahokia stands out as the most remarkable. Located near the confluence of major rivers in the central United States, Cahokia became a large, organized urban center supported by wide networks of villages and agricultural fields. Its growth reflected both opportunity and innovation. The surrounding land was rich in resources, supporting crops, game, and timber. The city itself was planned with intention. At its heart lay a grand plaza surrounded by mounds of different shapes and purposes. The largest, known as Monk's Mound, rose several stories high and required massive amounts of earth moved by hand. This colossal structure served as a platform for important buildings, rituals, and leadership activities. Cahokia included neighborhoods with houses arranged around communal courtyards. These neighborhoods reflected social organization that balanced family life with shared responsibilities. Skilled artisans produced pottery, tools, shell ornaments, copper items, and stone carvings. Traders traveled along rivers carrying these goods to distant regions, creating economic ties that connected Cahokia with communities far beyond its immediate surroundings. Ritual life played a central role in the city's identity. Large gatherings occurred in the plaza, where ceremonies, dances, and public events strengthened unity. Wooden circles similar to solar calendars were used to track celestial events. These structures guided agricultural decisions and ceremonial timing, showing how closely daily life was tied to the cosmic order. Cahokia represents one of the most sophisticated pre-Columbian cities in North America. Its growth and influence reveal the creativity, coordination, and cultural depth of the Mississippian world. Mississippian society consisted of layered roles and responsibilities. At the top were leaders who held both political and ceremonial authority. These leaders were seen as individuals who could communicate with sacred forces, ensure good harvests, and maintain balance between the spiritual and physical worlds. Their elevated status was symbolized by living or conducting rituals atop mounds. Elites supported activities such as feasts, construction projects, and diplomatic relationships with nearby communities. Below them were specialized workers including artisans, farmers, hunters, and builders. Each person contributed to the growth of the community through skills passed down through families. Daily life involved farming, gathering, crafting, and participating in rituals that marked the seasons. The Mississippian worldview emphasized cycles, connections, and relationships with nature. Animals held symbolic meaning, appearing in artwork and ceremonial objects. Birds often represented higher realms, while serpents symbolized transformation and the movement between worlds. These symbols appear in pottery, carved stone pipes, copper plates, and shell engravings found far across the region. Mississippian influence spread through trade, alliances, and shared ceremonial practices. Communities adopted similar mound-building traditions, social structures, and artistic styles. Although not unified under a single empire, these communities formed a broad cultural network connected through beliefs, trade routes, and shared values. As Mississippian society expanded, it shaped the identity of entire regions, leaving a lasting impact on North American history. Their achievements demonstrate that complex urban life, sophisticated belief systems, and large-scale architecture were not limited to any one part of the ancient world. Long before the rise of Cahokia or other major Mississippian centers, mound building had already existed in North America for thousands of years. These earlier traditions formed the foundation upon which later societies built their identities. One of the oldest known mound-building cultures was the Poverty Point tradition of the lower Mississippi Valley. Dating back more than 3,000 years, this society constructed large earthen ridges and mounds arranged in complex patterns. Their monumental earthworks required careful planning, coordinated labor, and a shared vision that extended across generations. Poverty Point's mounds were accompanied by trade networks stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast. The people who built them gathered exotic stones, minerals, and crafted objects that connected distant communities. The presence of these items shows that early mound-building cultures were not isolated. They engaged in long-distance exchange and ceremonial interaction long before the Mississippians appeared. Other early mound-building societies, such as those in the Ohio River Valley, created earthworks shaped like circles, squares, and even animals. These geometric and effigy mounds reveal advanced knowledge of measurement, astronomy, and symbolic design. Communities coordinated large construction projects that required thousands of workers moving soil basket by basket. These ancient mound-building traditions show how deeply rooted the practice was in North American history. The Mississippians inherited and expanded these ideas, but they were not the originators. Instead, they were the latest continuation of a long story in which people used earth, geometry, and collective effort to express their spiritual worldview and social identity. Understanding these earlier cultures helps reveal the continuity and evolution of ceremonial life across centuries. The Hopewell tradition, flourishing between 2,000 and 1,500 years ago, was not a single unified culture, but a vast network of communities connected through ceremonial exchange, shared symbolism, and mound-building practices. Centered in the Ohio and Illinois River valleys, Hopewell communities constructed some of the most impressive geometric earthworks in the ancient world. Circles, squares, and complex alignments stretched across massive landscapes, showing a precise understanding of spatial planning. The purpose of these earthworks appears to have been largely ceremonial. They may have served as gathering places for rituals, feasts, and astronomical observations. Inside burial mounds, Hopewell people placed finely crafted objects made from copper, obsidian, mica, shells, and carved stone. These items often came from distant regions, proving that Hopewell networks extended thousands of miles. Their ability to acquire and work with rare materials reveals skilled craftsmanship and strong social relationships across broad distances. Hopewell communities were connected not through political empire, but through shared ritual and symbolic language. Certain animal motifs appear across their artifacts, including birds of prey, bears, serpents, and other creatures believed to hold spiritual significance. These symbols may have represented clan identities, mythic narratives, or cosmological ideas about the relationship between earthly life and the spirit world. The Hopewell tradition eventually declined, but its influence lived on. Many later societies incorporated elements of Hopewell ceremonial practices or artistic forms. Their network represents one of the most sophisticated and far-reaching cultural systems in North American prehistory. The Woodland period, bridging the era between earlier mound-building traditions and the rise of large Mississippian centers, marks a time of shifting technologies, social structures, and cultural relationships. Communities during the Woodland period continued building mounds, but their purposes diversified. Some mounds served as burial monuments, others as ceremonial platforms, and still others as territorial markers. Pottery became more advanced during this era, with textured designs, improved firing techniques, and regionally distinct styles. The introduction of the bow and arrow transformed hunting practices, allowing communities to adapt their food strategies to changing environments. Agriculture also expanded. While early woodland groups cultivated native plants, such as sunflowers and goosefoot, later woodland societies increasingly adopted maize farming. This gradual shift toward maize agriculture laid the economic foundation for Mississippian population growth. Social organization evolved as well. Leadership roles became more defined, and long-distance trade networks expanded. Materials such as copper, marine shells, and special stones traveled across wide distances, linking communities through exchange and ceremonial obligations. Woodland societies served as cultural bridges between ancient mound traditions and the urban complexity of the Mississippian world. They preserved older practices while adopting new technologies and symbolic systems. Their innovations in agriculture, pottery, and social leadership helped prepare the landscape for the large cities and powerful centers that would emerge in the centuries leading up to Columbus. Without the developments of woodland cultures, the Mississippian world could not have taken the form it did. Mississippian towns were more than clusters of houses around ceremonial mounds. They were living communities shaped by cooperation, social responsibility, and a shared cultural worldview. People of all ages contributed to the rhythm of daily life. Farmers tended fields of maize, beans, and squash, often working collaboratively to manage planting and harvest cycles. These fields were crucial not only for survival, but for supporting large gatherings, construction projects, and ritual feasts. Houses were typically built from wattle and daub, with thatched roofs and packed earth floors. These structures were arranged around courtyards where families engaged in cooking, tool-making, weaving, and storytelling. The sound of children playing mixed with the tapping of stone tools, the scraping of hides, and the crackle of fire from hearths used throughout the day. Communities depended on a broad range of specialized skills. Hunters provided game, using bows, arrows, and traps to secure food and materials for clothing and ritual items. Artisans shaped pottery, carved stone pipes, etched shell ornaments, and hammered copper into symbolic designs. Traders traveled along river routes, carrying goods, stories, and news between communities. Leaders played essential roles by managing relationships between villages, organizing large construction events, and guiding ceremonies that aligned the community with natural and spiritual forces. Despite the structured hierarchy, daily life had a sense of shared purpose. Each contribution, whether agricultural or artistic, supported the stability and identity of the community. This interconnected system reveals a society deeply committed to cooperation and collective well-being. Ritual life shaped Mississippian society at every level. Their worldview saw the universe as layered and interconnected. The earthly world was tied to the sky realm above and the watery or underworld realm below. Mounds symbolized places where these realms connected. Leaders stood at the center of this symbolic structure. They were responsible for conducting rituals that ensured the community remained in harmony with cosmic cycles. Ceremonies marked seasonal transitions such as planting, harvest, and the arrival of winter. These rituals guided agricultural schedules and reinforced social unity. Sacred fires burned during major events, symbolizing continuity and purification. Priests and ritual specialists interpreted celestial signs, using knowledge passed through generations to understand when certain ceremonies should take place. Symbols of birds, serpents, and horned beings often appeared in ritual contexts, representing forces believed to influence weather, fertility, and the movement of souls. Ceremonial plazas served as spaces for dances, storytelling, feasts, and myth reenactments. These gatherings were more than performances. They were collective expressions of shared identity. People reaffirmed their belonging to the community, strengthened alliances, and honored ancestors. Burial rituals reflected beliefs about the afterlife. Grave goods placed with the deceased, copper ornaments, shell beads, pottery, or tools, suggest a belief that individuals traveled to another realm where these items held meaning. The landscape itself became sacred. Rivers, hills, mounds, and forests were all sites of spiritual interaction. The Mississippian world was one where everyday tasks and cosmic concerns merged into a single fabric of meaning. Art in Mississippian societies carried deep symbolic meaning. It was neither decorative nor created solely for trade. Artistic systems reflected beliefs, social values, and connections to the natural world. Many of the most iconic Mississippian objects come from engraved shells, carved stone pipes, hammered copper plates, and painted pottery. These objects often feature designs of powerful animals such as falcons, panthers, serpents, bears, and supernatural beings that combined human and animal traits. Each symbol carried layered meaning, sometimes linked to clan traditions, myth cycles, or spiritual pathways. The falcon, for example, represented the upper world, warfare, and the disciplined strength expected of leaders. The serpent symbolized transformation and the pathways between realms. The panther embodied the dangerous forces of the underworld, marking the border between life and death. These symbols traveled far across regions, appearing in communities separated by hundreds of miles. This shared symbolic language created a broad cultural network. Even without political unification, Mississippian societies were connected through their artwork and ritual imagery. Artistic exchange also influenced alliances. When leaders acquired or gifted symbolic objects, they strengthened relationships and demonstrated their connection to powerful spiritual traditions. Artisans held respected roles because their work shaped the way communities expressed and understood their worldview. Their designs reinforced identity while allowing creativity and variation. The beauty and complexity of Mississippian artwork stand as evidence of an intellectually rich culture that used symbols to navigate both earthly problems and spiritual questions. These artistic traditions form a vital link between the physical accomplishments of mound building and the deeper cultural meaning that sustained Mississippian life. Trade was the lifeblood of the Mississippian world. The vast river networks of North America acted like natural highways, allowing people to travel long distances with canoes loaded with goods, stories, and ceremonial knowledge. Communities along the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, the Tennessee River, and countless tributaries linked together into an economic system that moved far more than material objects. These waterways were crucial for distributing maize, dried fish, pottery, stone tools, pigments, woven goods, and specialized crafts. But trade was not purely economic. The movement of goods brought new ideas into every participating community. When a trader arrived with objects from a distant region, people gathered to learn where the goods came from, who made them, and what ceremonies or beliefs accompanied them. In this way, objects became teachers. They carried cultural meaning that shaped local practices. Long-distance trade routes connected Cahokia with regions as far away as the Great Lakes, the Gulf Coast, and the Appalachian Mountains. Copper from northern mines, marine shells from southern coasts, and special stones from distant quarries all traveled across these networks. Every object that moved had a story attached to it, and these stories formed connections that held communities together. Over time, these networks created a sense of shared cultural continuity across vast distances. Even without political unity, Mississippian societies participated in a common economic and symbolic world. Trade promoted cooperation, encouraged peace between some regions, and occasionally sparked rivalry. This dynamic exchange system reveals that the Mississippian era was more interconnected than many imagine, a complex web of relationships that shaped identity and innovation across centuries. Trade often overlapped with diplomacy. Leaders from different towns met to negotiate alliances, settle disputes, or arrange ceremonial partnerships. These meetings took place during large gatherings that included feasts, rituals, athletic competitions, and gift exchanges. Gift giving was a powerful diplomatic tool. Objects such as engraved shells, copper plates, special arrowheads, or elaborately painted pottery were given not simply as luxury items, but as symbols of respect, trust, and shared obligation. These gifts created bonds that went beyond short-term agreements. They linked families, leaders, and entire communities into webs of mutual responsibility. Ceremonial exchange was equally important. Communities sometimes invited visiting leaders or ritual specialists to participate in ceremonies that honored ancestors or marked significant seasonal transitions. These shared ceremonies created a sense of unity across regional boundaries. Knowledge about agricultural cycles, weather patterns, and celestial movements also circulated during these gatherings. Diplomacy among Mississippian societies was sophisticated. Leaders understood how to balance power, protect trade routes, and build relationships that strengthened political security. Although conflicts occurred, many interactions were peaceful and focused on maintaining stability. Diplomacy played a major role in allowing large centers, such as Cahokia, to influence distant regions without exerting direct control. This approach to regional interaction shows a society capable of forming complex networks grounded in respect, ritual, and shared interests rather than military domination. The Mississippian world thrived because cooperation and ceremonial exchange created a foundation strong enough to support large populations and extensive cultural development. Symbolic systems in Mississippian culture traveled widely through trade, diplomacy, and migration. These symbols appeared in artwork, ceremonial objects, architecture, and personal adornment. Their wide distribution tells us that people across the region participated in a shared understanding of the cosmos, even if they expressed it differently. Certain motifs became almost universal across Mississippian territory. The falcon warrior, for example, appeared in copper plates and carved shells found hundreds of miles apart. This figure symbolized authority, courage, and the connection between earthly leaders and cosmic forces. The serpent, another widespread motif, represented transformation and the boundary between realms. Effigy pipes carved into the shapes of birds, animals, or hybrid beings showed how people visualized the spiritual world. When these objects moved across regions, they carried the symbolic meanings with them, allowing distant communities to adopt and reinterpret them. Architectural forms also spread through regional interaction. Platform mounds, plazas, and ceremonial layouts became common features. Though each community added local variations, the underlying design principles remained recognizable. This shared architectural language reinforced cultural unity and made ceremonial centers instantly identifiable to visitors. Even pottery reflected symbolic exchange. Decorative patterns and shapes traveled across networks, influencing styles far from their place of origin. These shared symbols did not erase local traditions. Instead, they created a cultural conversation in which communities could express identity while participating in a larger symbolic world. Through regional interaction, Mississippian societies built a cultural system that embraced diversity and unity at the same time. This system strengthened social bonds and preserved knowledge that had been passed down for generations. It shows how symbolism, ritual, and artistic expression can knit together a continent-spanning cultural landscape. Mississippian architecture centered on earthen mounds, some of which remain among the largest prehistoric structures in North America. These mounds were engineering achievements requiring knowledge of soil types, compaction methods, drainage strategies, and long-term structural stability. Workers used baskets to carry thousands of loads of earth, layering them carefully to prevent erosion and collapse. The process involved planning that could span decades or even generations. Some mounds displayed colored layers of soil, intentionally arranged to symbolize different realms of the cosmos or mark stages of construction. The largest mounds, such as those in Cahokia, reached heights of multiple stories and required millions of cubic feet of earth. These were not random structures. Their placement reflected astronomical alignments, ceremonial needs, and social hierarchy. Builders may have tested soil composition by hand or through observation, selecting materials that resisted water saturation or provided firm support. even without metal tools or draft animals. They created stable foundations capable of supporting temples, residences of leaders, and ceremonial stages. The construction of mounds required cooperation among hundreds or thousands of workers. Participation in such projects strengthened community bonds and reinforced loyalty to leaders who organized the effort. These monumental constructions were physical expressions of spiritual belief. They represented mountains, gateways to other realms, or platforms that connected the earthly world to the sky above. The engineering expertise displayed in these works debunks outdated assumptions about pre-Columbian North America. Mississippian builders were thoughtful planners whose designs reflect practical problem solving and deep symbolic meaning. Their achievements show how Earth itself became a tool for expressing history, identity, and cosmic knowledge. Mississippian cities were meticulously organized. Their layouts reveal a society that valued order, balance, and community interaction. Central plazas acted as the heart of each city. These open spaces provided room for large gatherings, rituals, games, and political meetings. Surrounding the plaza were mounds of different shapes and sizes, each serving a specific function. Leadership residences or temples sat atop the tallest mounds, symbolizing the elevated status of rulers and spiritual authorities. Secondary mounds might hold council houses, storage buildings, or ritual structures. Houses for ordinary families were arranged in clusters, reflecting kinship networks or social units. Pathways connected neighborhoods, allowing residents to move easily between domestic, ceremonial, and market areas. Many Mississippian cities included defensive features, such as wooden palisades built from large logs set vertically into the ground. Guard towers and elevated platforms allowed defenders to watch for threats. These defenses reveal that while trade and diplomacy were vital, conflict among communities was also a reality. Defensive structures required significant teamwork to build and maintain. Inside the walls, the city remained a vibrant place where daily activities blended with ongoing ceremonial obligations. Public works, such as maintaining waterways or clearing fields, were community responsibilities. The design of these cities shows an understanding that physical space influences social life. Thoughtful planning encouraged interaction, reinforced hierarchy, and supported the cultural rhythms of ceremony, agriculture, and trade. These cities were not improvised settlements. They were planned environments shaped by leaders who understood the importance of structure in maintaining harmony and stability. Mississippian architecture cannot be understood without looking at the symbolic meanings embedded in these built spaces. Every mound, plaza, and alignment carried spiritual significance. The layout of cities often mirrored a three-part cosmic model involving the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. Mounds symbolized mountains or the dwelling places of powerful beings. Plazas represented the ordered human space where the community gathered to witness and participate in rituals. The careful orientation of buildings toward sunrise or sunset during key seasonal events reflected a belief that human activity should align with celestial patterns. Such alignments allowed leaders to time ceremonies with agricultural cycles, reinforcing their authority and demonstrating their knowledge of cosmic rhythms. Architecture became a tool for teaching and reaffirming worldview. When people gathered around mounds during ceremonies, they participated in a physical reenactment of mythic events. The movement of dancers, the lighting of fires, and the use of elevated platforms created a bridge between the community and the spiritual forces believed to influence their lives. Symbols carved or painted on structures, such as serpents, birds, and geometric designs, reminded people of their place in the wider universe. These symbols carried messages about balance, transformation, and the responsibilities of leadership. Architecture expressed identity, history, and cosmic order in ways that were understood intuitively by residents. Modern observers can still feel the intended effect when standing near preserved mound complexes. Even in silence, the earthworks communicate the Mississippian understanding that built space is never merely practical. It is a reflection of belief, purpose, and the enduring connection between people and the world they inhabit. Mississippian political structures were shaped by leaders often referred to as chiefs. These figures held both ceremonial and administrative responsibilities. Their authority depended on the belief that they maintained harmony between the community and the forces shaping the natural and spiritual world. Chiefs organized large-scale agricultural planning, oversaw construction projects, mediated disputes, supervised trade relationships, and led seasonal ceremonies. Their leadership extended far beyond issuing commands. They embodied the identity of the community. Chiefs were expected to demonstrate wisdom, restraint, generosity, and spiritual knowledge. During major rituals, they appeared before the people on elevated mounds, reinforcing the belief that they operated closer to the cosmic forces guiding the community. Their homes or temples on mountaintops were not simply residences. They were symbols of elevated status and responsibility. Chiefs often relied on council members, priests, and advisors who helped interpret celestial events, manage alliances, and guide community decisions. Because Mississippian societies placed great importance on ritual timing, leaders needed to understand agricultural cycles, weather patterns, and a broader symbolic meaning behind each season. Their authority was strengthened when rituals succeeded, crops flourished, and trade networks remained stable. If these conditions faltered, pressure would build. Leadership was a position of immense responsibility that required a clear understanding of both earthly logistics and spiritual expectations. Chiefs upheld the delicate balance that defined Mississippian life, and their success or failure could shape the fortunes of entire regions. Mississippian communities were structured through kinship networks that defined responsibilities, social roles, and relationships between families. These kin groups formed the backbone of society. They organized labor, maintained traditions, and shaped everyday interactions. Kinship determined who worked together on agricultural plots, who participated in specific ceremonies, and who inherited certain responsibilities. While chiefs held high authority, the strength of the community rested in the cooperation of these kin groups. Shared work was central to Mississippian life. Families cooperated on planting, harvesting, building, and preparing for large gatherings. When the community needed to construct a new mound or repair a defensive wall, people came together in coordinated effort. Participation in such tasks reinforced ties between families and demonstrated loyalty to leaders. Social roles were shaped by age, skill, and tradition. Elders provided guidance and preserved oral histories. Adults carried the bulk of labor responsibilities. Young people learned skills through daily involvement in family tasks. Artisans, traders, and ritual specialists formed respected groups whose abilities supported the broader community. The exchange of goods and marriage alliances further strengthened community relationships. Families often formed connections with distant towns through marriage, creating bonds that supported diplomacy and trade. These ties helped maintain stability and encouraged peaceful relationships even during times of competition. The organization of Mississippian society shows how interdependence formed the foundation of political and cultural success. Communities thrived because people understood their roles, respected tradition, and recognized that cooperation ensured survival and growth. Although Mississippian societies valued harmony, conflict was a reality that shaped their history. Rival communities might compete for fertile land, access to trade routes, or symbolic prestige tied to certain ceremonies. These tensions sometimes escalated into warfare, prompting the construction of defensive palisades, guard towers, and moats around major towns. Archaeological evidence suggests that some cities experienced periods of violence, abandonment, or rebuilding after attacks. Power struggles also occurred within communities. Leadership might pass from one chief to another peacefully, but disputes over succession could fracture social unity. Factions within the ruling elite might disagree over ceremonial responsibilities, trade alliances, or interpretations of cosmic signs. These disagreements sometimes weakened political cohesion, making the community vulnerable to external threats. Environmental changes contributed to instability as well. A poor harvest or drought could cause doubt in the chief's ability to maintain cosmic balance. When people lost confidence in leadership, they might migrate to other regions or join rival communities. This movement of people reshaped the political landscape and sometimes led to the decline of major centers. Even so, Mississippian societies demonstrated resilience. Many communities rebuilt after periods of turmoil, reestablishing trade networks and revitalizing ceremonial practices. Their ability to adapt reveals the complexity of their political systems. They were neither fragile nor static. Instead, they balanced cooperation and competition, tradition and innovation. Their struggles and achievements highlight the depth of political life before Columbus, showing that North American societies faced challenges similar to those experienced by ancient civilizations across the world. Mississippian art carried meaning far beyond decoration. Every engraved shell, carved stone pipe, copper plate, or painted pot reflected a worldview grounded in spiritual relationships between people, animals, nature, and cosmic forces. Art served as a language capable of expressing ideas too complex for simple speech. This symbolic power shaped both daily life and ceremonial experience. In many Mississippian towns, artisans worked with materials obtained through long-distance trade, including marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from northern regions, and fine stones from the Appalachian foothills. These materials were chosen not only for their beauty, but for their symbolic properties. Certain shells represented water and fertility. Copper radiated associations with the sun, energy, and transformation. Stones carried ancestral or territorial meaning. Artisans shaped these materials into objects that served ritual, political, or diplomatic purposes. Symbolic designs were carefully chosen to reflect social identity, clan affiliation, or mythic narratives. Objects buried with individuals in mounds were not random possessions. They reflected the spiritual roles, achievements, or responsibilities of the deceased. Art connected people to ancestors and cosmic forces, reinforcing continuity over generations. Even in everyday life, small symbolic items such as pendants or decorated pottery carried subtle reminders of cultural values. The presence of symbols helped guide behavior, encourage harmony, and reinforce community bonds. Mississippian art reveals a society deeply committed to expressing meaning through crafted form. It provides a window into the beliefs that shaped their world, showing how carefully they woven spiritual significance into every aspect of life. The Mississippian universe was imagined as a layered cosmos with three main realms: the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. These realms were populated by powerful supernatural beings that influenced weather, fertility, conflict, and the flow of life. Artistic symbols acted as representations of these cosmic forces. The upper world was associated with the sun, stars, birds of prey, and beings connected to light, order, and authority. Falcon warriors often symbolized leadership and the disciplined strength needed to maintain cosmic harmony. Their images appear on copper plates, shell carvings, and stone sculptures. The middle world, inhabited by humans, was a place of balance between forces. It required constant guidance from leaders and ritual specialists. The lower world represented water, darkness, transformation, and fertility. Serpents, underwater panthers, and amphibious creatures represented the power and danger of this realm. These beings were neither good nor evil. They were forces that required respect and proper ritual acknowledgement. The interaction between realms formed the foundation of Mississippian ceremonial life. Leaders performed rituals that symbolically connected the community with cosmic forces, believing that success depended on maintaining harmony across all three worlds. Artistic representations of mythic beings served as reminders of these relationships. They educated the community about origin stories, moral lessons, and the responsibilities of leadership. The three-world cosmos appears in mount alignments, ceremonial practices, and symbolic objects found across the Mississippian sphere. This worldview shaped identity, ritual timing, social hierarchy, and the architecture of entire cities. It reveals a civilization whose spiritual imagination was as complex and layered as that of any major culture in world history. Although the Mississippian world shared symbolic traditions, it was not culturally uniform. Each region developed its own interpretations of mythic beings, ceremonial practices, and artistic styles. This diversity adds depth to our understanding of pre-Columbian North America. In the southeast, communities in what are now Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee adapted Mississippian symbols to their local beliefs. Their engraved shell gorgets display unique variations of serpent and bird motifs. In the Midwest, symbols often reflected local animals, regional mythologies, and the agricultural cycle specific to that landscape. On the Gulf Coast, communities created artwork influenced by access to marine shells and coastal ecology. Despite these differences, symbols remained recognizable across vast regions. This shows that Mississippian societies participated in a shared symbolic dialogue while maintaining local identity. Cultural diversity did not weaken unity. It strengthened it by allowing communities to connect through common themes while honoring their own traditions. Trade, diplomacy, intermarriage, and ceremonial gatherings helped maintain this balance. When symbols traveled from one region to another, they were often reinterpreted to fit local context. This process of adaptation reflects creative engagement rather than passive adoption. It demonstrates the intellectual and artistic richness of Mississippian civilization. The coexistence of shared meaning and regional variation reveals a cultural landscape defined by conversation, innovation, and respect for tradition. It shows that North America before Columbus was home to a sophisticated symbolic world that rivaled the artistic and philosophical depth of ancient societies across the globe. Mississippian and related mound-building cultures lived in landscapes that required constant adaptation. Seasonal changes shaped the ways communities moved, farmed, hunted, and managed resources. Many people lived in permanent towns, but movement was still a regular part of life. Seasonal hunting expeditions took groups into forests, prairies, and river valleys where game was abundant at particular times of year. Fishing camps appeared along waterways during peak spawning seasons. Gathering trips followed cycles of ripening fruits, nuts, and medicinal plants. These movements were not random or improvised. They followed long-established knowledge about the environment, passed through generations by observation and oral tradition. Mississippian agriculture was sophisticated, but even farming required flexible adaptation. Floodplain soils could become extremely fertile after seasonal water rise, but flooding also brought unpredictability. Farmers learned how to read the river's behavior, adjust planting schedules, and use elevated fields or ridged plots where needed. Communities also practiced forest management, using controlled burns to encourage the growth of desirable plants and create open spaces for hunting. Migration occurred when environmental stress pushed populations to relocate. Droughts, soil depletion, or shifts in river channels could force communities to move their towns or establish new ceremonial centers. These relocations were not simple decisions. Moving a town meant transporting social obligations, rebuilding mounds, and reestablishing symbolic relationships with the landscape. Yet Mississippian peoples handled these challenges with resilience. Their capacity to shift with environmental conditions demonstrates a deep understanding of the natural world. Their strategies reveal a dynamic relationship with the land, one that balanced stability in core communities with flexible movement across changing landscapes. As Mississippian populations expanded, resource demand increased. Growing towns required more food, timber, and materials for construction. This rise in population density created new pressures that shaped political decisions, social organization, and community responsibilities. Leaders had to coordinate agricultural labor, maintain food-storage facilities, and ensure that surrounding lands were used efficiently. Timber harvesting for houses, palisades, and ceremonial buildings required ongoing labor. Over time, communities sometimes cleared large areas of forest, changing local ecosystems. These changes affected hunting patterns and required adjustments in subsistence strategies. Population pressure also influenced social roles. As towns grew, artisans, traders, and ritual specialists took on increasingly specialized responsibilities. Leadership became more structured to manage large communities. Some towns developed satellite villages that supported the central hub with food or labor. These satellite communities helped distribute population more evenly across the region. Population growth also sparked competition. As communities expanded into neighboring territories, disputes over land or resources became more common. Diplomacy and alliance building helped manage these tensions, but conflict occurred when negotiations failed. Migration sometimes became the solution. Families or entire groups might relocate to less crowded areas where new opportunities existed. These movements shaped cultural diversity within the Mississippian world, spreading ideas, artistic styles, and ceremonial practices into new regions. Population growth and resource pressure created both challenges and opportunities. These forces helped transform Mississippian society from smaller village networks into large, complex cultural regions capable of supporting monumental architecture, widespread trade, and sophisticated ritual cycles. Toward the later phases of the Mississippian era, significant migrations reshaped the cultural landscape of eastern North America. Some major centers declined due to internal conflict, environmental stress, or shifting trade networks. As towns weakened, families and groups dispersed into surrounding regions, bringing their traditions with them. These migrations did not erase Mississippian culture. Instead, they changed its shape. The symbolic systems, artistic motifs, and social practices developed at large centers spread into smaller communities across the Southeast and Midwest. In some regions, newcomers blended with existing populations, creating hybrid traditions that preserved older elements while incorporating local innovations. This blending created new ceremonial styles, artistic expressions, and community structures. Migrations also resulted in shifting alliances. Groups moving into new areas often formed relationships with local communities, linked by intermarriage, trade partnerships, or shared ritual obligations. These relationships helped stabilize regions experiencing change, maintaining continuity amid disruption. In some cases, migrations led to competition over territory or resources, which reshaped political boundaries. Yet, even in these situations, cultural traditions continued to circulate. Mississippian influence persisted in pottery designs, mound building practices, and symbolic iconography long after the decline of major cities. This resilience highlights the adaptive strength of Mississippian culture. Even when communities relocated or reorganized, their traditions did not disappear. They transformed through movement, continuing to influence the cultural identities of later indigenous societies across the eastern half of the continent. Migration was not an ending. It was a transition that carried Mississippian heritage forward into new regions and new eras. In the centuries leading up to European arrival, the Mississippian world underwent major transformations. Large centers like Cahokia had already declined by this time, but the broader cultural traditions they inspired remained active across many regions. The decline of major centers was not sudden or uniform. It unfolded through a combination of environmental strain, shifting trade routes, internal tensions, and changing political priorities. As populations grew and agricultural demands increased, some regions found it more difficult to sustain the large ceremonial hubs that had defined earlier centuries. Soil exhaustion, deforestation, and unpredictable climate patterns strained food production. In some cases, leaders struggled to maintain authority when rituals failed to produce expected results or when communities questioned their ability to secure stability. Yet the decline of one center often created space for others to rise. Towns in the southeast, the upper Midwest, and the Tennessee Valley developed strong regional identities. These communities continued mound-building traditions, elaborate ceremonial cycles, and active trade networks. Their political structures varied widely, showing that the Mississippian world was never a single unified system, but a mosaic of local adaptations. Some regions maintained centralized leadership, while others adopted more distributed forms of governance. These transitions reveal a society capable of responding to change without losing its cultural coherence. Even as major centers faded, the essential symbolic language, artistic traditions, and ceremonial practices of Mississippian life remained vibrant across smaller towns and regional hubs. Despite political changes, spiritual traditions remained deeply rooted in daily life. Ceremonies continued to mark seasonal cycles, honor ancestors, and maintain balance between the earthly world and the spiritual realms. Mound building persisted, though on a smaller scale in many regions, serving as platforms for rituals, burials, or council gatherings. Symbolic motifs, such as falcon warriors, serpents, and animal-human hybrids, did not disappear. They continued to appear on shell carvings, pottery, copper ornaments, and painted textiles. These symbols evolved as communities adapted them to local narratives and newly emerging social realities. Ritual knowledge continued to pass through families and specialists who understood celestial movements, agricultural timing, and the protocols of diplomacy. Alliances between communities played an important role in maintaining stability. Leaders traveled to neighboring regions to form partnerships through feasts, gift exchanges, and marriage arrangements. These alliances helped secure trade routes, reduce conflict, and provide mutual support in times of hardship. In some cases, shared ceremonies among allied communities reinforced the broader Mississippian identity that persisted even as local political systems shifted. Ritual gatherings provided a platform for exchanging stories, renewing commitments, and teaching younger generations the cultural ideals that guided life. Inter-community alliances also helped transfer symbolic traditions across great distances. Because of this, the Mississippian symbolic world remained cohesive even as the political map changed. Continuity in spiritual life reveals a civilization that possessed deep cultural resilience. Its belief systems endured because they were flexible enough to adapt to shifting circumstances while remaining meaningful to the people who lived them. As the 15th century closed, the Americas were home to countless vibrant societies shaped by millennia of innovation and adaptation. The Mississippian world and its related traditions extended across vast regions, influencing how people farmed, built cities, conducted ceremonies, and interpreted the cosmos. These societies were not static. They were engaged in continuous reorganization as environmental conditions, alliances, and trade patterns shifted. By the time European explorers approached the continent, many indigenous communities had refined political systems, expanded trade connections, and established deeply rooted ceremonial landscapes. The arrival of Europeans would soon introduce disruptions unlike anything experienced before, including new diseases, unfamiliar animals, and foreign political ambitions. But it is important to recognize that indigenous societies were not passive or unprepared. They had long histories of managing change, forming alliances, and adapting to shifting conditions. They were capable of strategic diplomacy, organized defense, and cultural preservation. Many communities maintained strong traditional knowledge that would help them navigate the early decades of contact. The world that existed before Columbus was one of complexity and sophistication. It included spiritual depth, architectural achievement, artistic mastery, and networks of exchange that connected thousands of miles. These civilizations had already risen, transformed, and reshaped themselves long before European ships appeared on distant horizons. Understanding this threshold moment reveals not the discovery of an unknown world, but the meeting of two worlds that had followed different paths of development. The indigenous societies of North America carried their traditions, languages, and worldviews across this moment and into the centuries that followed. The story of the Americas before Columbus is far more connected and dynamic than old narratives once suggested. For generations, textbooks treated the Western Hemisphere as if it were waiting for discovery, ignoring the depth and complexity of the societies that had shaped it for thousands of years. The Olmec, Toltec, Mississippians, and the many mound-building cultures that came before and after them formed a diverse mosaic of civilizations with their own innovations, philosophies, and systems of order. These were not isolated pockets of development. They participated in regional networks of trade, diplomacy, symbolic exchange, and migration that created a patchwork of interwoven cultural landscapes. When a ceremonial object made of Gulf Coast shell was found in the interior river valleys, it was evidence of relationships that linked distant worlds. When Toltec symbols appeared on architectural columns far beyond central Mexico, it showed how ideas could travel without armies. When Mississippian iconography surfaced across thousands of miles, it demonstrated the endurance of shared symbols across independent societies. These civilizations did not wait for contact with Europe to become complex. They built monumental structures, defined political authority, developed sophisticated agriculture, practiced astronomy, shaped art with deep symbolic meaning, and maintained trade routes that spanned continents. The myth of an empty hemisphere collapses under the weight of the evidence. The Americas before 1492 were full, active, and vibrant. Their stories reveal that human creativity and resilience shaped every corner of the world long before global empires began crossing oceans. To understand the past honestly, we must begin by acknowledging that discovery does not refer to the arrival of outsiders, but to the recognition of civilizations that have been thriving all along. The civilizations discussed throughout this history contributed significantly to human knowledge in ways that still resonate today. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec played a foundational role by developing early forms of symbolic writing, astronomical observation, and ceremonial architecture. Their worldview, art forms, and political models set the stage for later cultures that expanded on their achievements. The Toltec, rising in a later era, contributed to the intellectual evolution of central Mexico through their architectural advances, martial discipline, and philosophical traditions. Their city planning, stone carving, and symbolic systems influenced societies long after Tula declined. Much of their cultural memory survived through storytelling and historical reinterpretation. In North America, the Mississippian world demonstrated remarkable engineering skill through the construction of massive earthen mounds. They developed agricultural strategies that supported large populations and maintained ecological balance through controlled land management. Their cities were carefully planned, with plazas, palisades, and ceremonial complexes that reflected an understanding of social and cosmic alignment. Their symbolic systems displayed intellectual depth comparable to those of any ancient civilization. From copperworking to shell engraving to large-scale trade, their innovations enriched regional cultures for centuries. Across these societies, knowledge was passed through oral tradition, ritual performance, artistic expression, and everyday practice. Their contributions show that intellectual achievement is not limited to civilizations with written alphabets or stone monuments. The knowledge systems of the Americas reflect different but equally profound ways of understanding reality. Their scientific, cultural, and social innovations are part of the global human story, and recognizing them allows us to see world history not as a single line of development, but as a series of parallel paths that intersect in meaningful ways. The moment Europeans arrived in the Americas is often framed as a beginning, but it was truly an encounter between worlds that had existed independently for millennia. The civilizations of the Olmec, Toltec, Mississippian, and earlier mound-building cultures were not lost or primitive. They were societies that experienced rises and declines, shaped landscapes through monumental architecture, organized complex political systems, and developed spiritual beliefs that linked nature, ancestors, and cosmic order. Their histories are continuous, not isolated from the broader story of human civilization. Reframing this narrative requires shifting the focus from discovery to recognition. Instead of imagining 1492 as a moment when the world expanded, we can understand it as a moment when two expansive worlds met. Each had its own internal logic, achievements, and challenges. Indigenous societies responded to change with the same complexity seen in every major civilization across history. They negotiated alliances, resisted threats, adapted to new pressures, and preserved cultural identity even under extraordinary strain. Recognizing the long histories of these societies restores balance to the global story of human development. It reminds us that innovation did not travel in one direction, nor did cultural evolution depend on contact with Europe. The Americas were already rich with diverse human experiences long before oceanic voyages created new connections. This understanding encourages a more complete appreciation of the past. It honors the people who shaped landscapes, carved symbols of their beliefs, built cities of earth and stone, and carried forward traditions that endure through descendant communities today. Their world was never waiting to be discovered. It was already full of meaning, achievement, and history. What you heard today was the true story of the Americas long before European arrival. You explored civilizations that shaped their environments, engineered cities of earth and stone, practiced complex astronomy, formed symbolic languages, and built networks that stretched across rivers, forests, mountains, and coastlines. You saw how the Olmec laid deep foundations for Mesoamerican culture, how the Toltec blended warfare, philosophy, and artistry into a powerful legacy, and how the Mississippian world created a vibrant landscape of mounds, plazas, rituals, and trade routes. The moral of this history is simple but important. The Americas were never empty, and they were never waiting to be discovered. They were already home to thriving civilizations with knowledge, creativity, and identity. These societies solved their own problems, managed their own worlds, and carried forward traditions that still live through indigenous communities today. They remind us that history is richer when we look beyond old myths and recognize the brilliance of people who built their worlds long before global empires crossed oceans. Thank you for joining this journey on History Teller YT. If you enjoyed exploring these hidden layers of the past, make sure to come back. There are many more stories waiting here. Stories of ancient worlds, forgotten cultures, powerful rulers, lost cities, and the ideas that shaped our human story. Your seat is always open, and another chapter is just around the corner. See you next time.